Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. Nice to meet you. The Smoko podcast is the place to celebrate and highlight women working within STEM and trades occupations. And today we are really lucky to be joined by the lovely Natalie Kovarik, who's coming all the way from central Nebraska to talk all things agriculture and ranching. So please join us, tune in, take a break. We're on Smoko. Natalie, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you so much for asking me on. I am honored. I'm so excited when a new podcast is getting started. I love the podcasting space. So welcome to it, and this will be fun.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Coming from you and Discover AG, I really appreciate it. And thank you again for coming out. This is going to be a lot of fun. And so to kind of start us off, Nat, could you give us a little bit about your background? So you've been a rancher your entire life, and specifically, in my understanding, cattle ranching. For those people unaware of cattle ranching, could you kind of give us a Coles Nuts description of what it is and what does the industry look like?
Yeah, I will try my hardest because, sorry, you asked probably to deliver a simple answer on one of the most complex questions you could ask. But yes, I did grow up in agriculture. I grew up on a ranch in Southwest Montana. So it has been a part of my life for a very long time. I don't want to say leave the industry, but I ended up getting my education in pharmacy. And so when I graduated, I did not return back to our family operation. I ended up moving to a bigger city in Montana, which is relative depending, maybe where you're tuning in from, but it was a bigger city in Montana and I was, working in a hospital and I kind of thought that would be my life. And it wasn't until I met my husband that I kind of came back to the ranch. And like you said, we ranch here in central Nebraska. You are correct. It is a cattle ranch. It is a beef ranch. And so for everyone tuning in who's very unfamiliar with agriculture, that is, the meat you get in the supermarket, the meat in restaurants, it comes from ranches like my husband and I's. So, Cliff Notes version of what ranching looks like. I think what's most important for everyone tuning in and why I say I have a hard time giving a simple description for ranching is, or even farming and agriculture in general, is that nothing is the same in the industry. And so it makes it really hard to explain it. I can very confidently say that there are probably not two operations in the US that are going to be exactly the same, ran the same way, just from so many different standpoints, geography being a really big one. Obviously, a ranch in Florida would look a whole lot different than a ranch in Montana. Whether it is rainfall or soil type or the amount of land you have to work with. I mean, there are so many variables that go into it that to kind of give that, here's a broad description of what, your US farmer and rancher does and looks like is just so variable. So to answer it, I guess from my viewpoint, we're on a ranch in central Nebraska. It is my husband and I, and we have 3 boys and then 1 full-time employee. And we run pretty much cattle. We don't do a lot of farming, so no crops. And we are a type of the beef industry that does produce the beef that goes into, restaurants and grocery stores. So we're kind of the first part of that. There's about 5 steps it takes to kind of go from pasture to plate, and we play kind of the beginning one.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful answer, because I did kind of set you up for the impossible task of please describe a huge industry in 2 seconds. That is, you're correct. It's so different, independent of ranch to ranch and landscape, right? The sandhills is going to, again, look very different than Florida. And even within your pasture and within your land, I bet you have different pockets that look completely different to each other, right?
And I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, from even if you talk to a producer, if they're really good at their job, which a lot of farmers and ranchers are, they may manage, the part of their operation different from the other part of their operation, just because, again, ground can vary and there's different variables it's a very complex industry, which is why we created our podcast Discover Ag, is because we wanted to have these nuanced conversations around the food system.
Yeah, I love it. From a nerdy geoscience perspective, I absolutely love like the nuanced conversation of soil science and different and weather patterns. And I don't know, I just have so much respect for what you guys do, because I think that you have to be a jack of all trades and you have to be a scientist in so many different terms. You have to be a veterinary scientist, you have to be a soil scientist, a weather and climate, you have to be a mechanic, an electrician. You kind of have to do everything. I guess that's my understanding of ranching, is just like you guys are superhero people and do everything.
Well, maybe that's what I'll start giving as my Cliff Notes version.
Yeah,
that can be our
superheroes.
answer. Yeah.
Honestly, please take it, because that's what I've always thought of people in ranching and farming. And growing up as a geologist, I had one professor that was like, if you want to know anything about quaternary geology, find a farmer and just pick their brain. So just go talk to them and they'll know it all.
You're kind. Thank you.
You're welcome. I guess we've already talked a little bit about this part of it, is that you and your husband and your 3 sons, you run the Kovarik Cattle Company, and it's in central Nebraska. You're from Montana. You went and worked in the hospitals for a number of years as pharmacy. And then, if I understood this correctly, you met your husband when he was in Montana to try to buy a cow. And from that, you guys created this cattle ranch. Is that true?
Yes, it's a very like country redneck love story. But yes, so my husband is Nebraska born and raised. I'm very jealous of my husband. He has been the type of person that and maybe like you, maybe from a very young age, you guys were the type of people that just knew what you wanted to do. You know, you knew where your passion lied and it just never wavered. I am not one of those people. I have always just kind of adapted and everything looks shiny and new and fun. And I'm just drawn to so many different things that I'm always envious of those people that just at their core, you know, knew what they were meant to do or to be. And that was my husband, and it was ranching for him. So he did not grow up on a ranch. It was in, you know, ranching was in his family. We're obviously in rural Nebraska. And so we're just in agriculture territory. We're in rural America. So his grandparents ranched, but his parents didn't. He grew up in town. You know, his parents, one of his dad's an eye doctor. His mom also worked in medical field. So he brought up that way, but still exposed to the ranching industry. And he went to college at UNL. And then after he graduated, he came back and started the ranch. And his parents really deterred it from him. He was supposed to go to be a dentist, which is hilarious if you know my husband, because they were just like, there's no, you know, there's not money in agriculture. There's kind of that narrative at that time. His parents went through, you know, the 80s was a really hard time for anyone listening in agriculture that wasn't in it. It was a pretty hard time for a lot of families. And so there was kind of coming out of that mentality that there's not money in ag. It's not a safe, you know, industry to be in. It can be hard to make a living in, definitely hard to start. It's very capital intensive. And so his parents kind of deterred it from him. But again, Luke, that's what he wanted to do. So he came back after college, started our operation. We're technically first generation. And then
amazing.
I met him when he came up to buy bulls from my dad. That's the ranch I grew up on, was a genetic operation. It's called seed stock, and we breed for other producers to buy our genetics. And so he was up buying a bull, and we always joke that he came for a bull and left with a wife, and that's how I ended up in Nebraska.
I absolutely love that redneck love story. I think it's so freaking cute. And I love the 2 different sides that you ended up being from a ranch and going into a medical field first before you came back to ranching. And he was from a medical family and ended up going into ranching. It's this beautiful kind of opposing story. It's a very lovely thing that it's full circle that you guys found each other, and through him buying a bull from your dad. Love that story. Love the redneck story. It's absolutely amazing. And your ranch now in central Nebraska in the Sandhills, it's fairly large, if I'm correct. And just from looking at your amount of calves last year for babies, I think you guys had 450 new babies. Was that correct?
We did. So yes, we are a larger operation. My husband loves cows. To put it a little bit in perspective, and again, going back to, you know, the complexity of how many producers it takes to get, you know, beef to the end product. There is about 700,000 beef producers in the US, and the average herd size is only 43. So it's pretty small. So when you get, you know, into numbers of my husband, which is, you know, in the multiple hundreds, we are definitely going to be a larger operation, which again is interesting because it, like I said, it's just him and I, and then our one full-time employee. We do, you know, we had an intern help us through calving season, and we'll have an intern this summer, a college kid. And so we do bring in extra help. But the idea that, big is bad in ag just isn't true. Like, we are definitely a bigger operation. I don't know how much more, I guess I can say that bluntly. But again, it's just us. It's just my husband and I and an employee. And so, if you are afraid of your food system because you feel like it is big, or that you think the bigger the number, the more factory it is. People love to say factory farm, the more industrialized it is, the more mechanical it is, the less human, the less family. That's just not true, especially in the beef industry side of it.
Yeah, I completely, you can see it because you guys do literally everything. If you look at your content, you guys are busy 24/7. It's just your husband and your little ones doing everything. And I think that's a good point of the general public does have this idea of the larger herd size and the larger farms being more automatic and being less people dependent. And I think you guys are a testament that it's actually the opposite in bigger operations. And maybe this kind of is a segue to this next question is, because you guys do everything, what has been the most rewarding and then the most challenging aspect of running your guys' ranch?
Yeah, you mentioned that my littles are with us a lot. It's my husband and I, and my oldest is in school. He's a teenager, so he's hardly ever in my content. Embarrassing mom on social media. And so, but you will see my two littles with me a lot. It's just hard not to show them when they are with us all the time. And so that is probably my favorite aspect, though, is that we are together as a family all the time, really living and working at the same time. It's not like an or, it's very much so like a bled into each other, which probably is my answer for what is the most challenging thing. But on to that in a second. But it's just, as a mother, it's really rewarding to get to spend so much time with my kids. And I believe personally, I'm probably a little bit biased, but I do think that there are a lot of wonderful skills. There's a lot of wonderful mentalities. There's a lot of wonderful things that are instilled in kids who grow up on a working farm or ranch. Just a couple weeks ago when we were kind of in the thick of calving, my littlest Rue, who is 2, so not very old at all, he was helping his dad bottle. Well, they bottle feed all the time, but he was helping actually tube a calf, which kind of looks like a bottle. But, he was holding there and he was helping dad. And I just kind of stepped back and I thought, wow, it is just so cool. He's barely talking, he's walking, but he's not this, fully functioning human. And he's doing something that, not even close to half of the population will ever do or witness or see. I just feel like they really live as kids. It's really cool to immerse them. I just feel like they feel the pulse of life really deeply. And so that is definitely what's most rewarding for me as a mom. What is challenging, I think, about operating in agriculture is we are, as you mentioned, we wear a lot of hats. And so there's a lot out of our control. And it's hard to be in an occupation or even with life, when you want to exert control and you can't. We're up against Mother Nature, weather all the time. If you think about what's going on in California right now with all the flooding, I mean, all those producers are up against something that will absolutely wipe out their entire crop. It will affect replanting. And that is their income. And as a nation, that's our food source. And so it's pretty stressful when we are completely out of control of something so big, whether it is snow, blizzard, drought, weather, wind, hurricanes, like whatever it is, we're just really at the mercy of weather. And it's really challenging. And we're at the mercy of, market prices. So I think a lot of people think farmers and ranchers are maybe price makers, but we are absolutely price takers. We do not have a very big say in that. And so that could be really, really stressful. And employment is really hard. And I mean, the list could go on. Like you said, stuff breaking down. I'll ask my husband what he's going to do for the day. And you would laugh if you tried to make a plan and execute a to-do list, because so many variables that are out of your control exert themselves into it. And so I think that is what is really challenging. And I also think that's why mental health is such a problem in agriculture, is because of that uncontrollable stress load. For people tuning in, ag has one of the highest suicide rates, which I don't think is talked about very much.
No.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible in the industry. And I think it is because farmers and ranchers feel the stress of everything going on, but it is out of their control to try and fix it.
Shame. Natalie, I had no idea that that stat existed. And that's a very, very sad stat. And I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a movement of trying to create more awareness around it, as well as destigmatize the industry from talking about it or seeking help. I think there's a lot of, it's actually social media has done a great job of that. I think there's a lot of people who are starting to stress the importance of mental health and awareness in the industry. And I definitely think, if you look at decades wise from like 60s, 70s, 80s, I think this is probably the best generation that is trying to move the needle forward on making some real progress in mental health for the ag industry.
And talking about it and just having resources and community, because I mean, it's crazy the amount of stress. Again, I think I mentioned at the very beginning of just how much respect I have for you guys because you do it everything. But that was just really from a science perspective. That wasn't even talking about economics and the fact that it's a pure business. And you're right, everything's outside of your control. It's standard field work that like you can't control the weather, you can't control what's going to happen or what's going to break. But then on top of it, you also have changing government policies. Again, you said you're price takers, not price makers. It's true. And you have no idea on international trade too. If they're going to flood the market, you have no idea. It's completely outside of your control. So I'm really sorry to hear that, but I could also imagine how stressful that would be if I was in that situation. I think I would be a ball of nerves. And thank you again for like sharing and for being so realistic with it. I really appreciate it. I think it's an important conversation.
Of course.
The next is maybe a little bit of a pivot. You and your friend and co-host, Tara Vanderdusen, you guys have started this wonderful podcast called Discover AG, which is in the top percentile of Apple Podcasts in the food space. And congratulations, that's absolutely huge. And this is a weekly podcast which really highlights and talks on the top trending topics in the agricultural and food space. And before we kind of dive into the content of it, could you kind of walk us through how you and Tara met? Because she's from New Mexico, you're out in Nebraska. And how did you guys meet, become friends, and then say, hey, we're going to create this wonderful platform, Discover AG?
We met online like any good millennial friendship does.
Love it.
Yeah. So we both had been sharing on social media. She was sharing even before I was. I think she's probably sharing closer to like 8 years now. Wow. I'm sharing closer to about 5 years. And there's always been like homesteading accounts on social media. But when we were sharing, I feel like there was very far and few between of like production agriculture sharing. And so we kind of just naturally gravitated toward each other. There was actually a small group of us, about 10 to 15, that were women, in agriculture on working farms and ranches. And we kind of had this little, message group on Instagram. It all started on Instagram. And so we known each other through that for quite some time. And I think I'd always been drawn to her. She's a go-getter, she's got a great personality. And, I am not a natural born entrepreneur. Again, going back to when you're little, I was not like slinging lemonade and selling my rocks and erasers like some kids tell stories about. But when I kind of stepped away from pharmacy and started, dipping my foot into this online entrepreneurship, like social media world, I recognized that I kind of had, a little bit of a drive and spirit in me as well. And I think that could, Tara and I think we have that in common. We really connected about that from like our drive and our passion. And so we were friends for quite a while online, and then we finally got to meet, and that really just kind of snowballed what we had experienced online connecting. When we finally got together in a room, it was just instant. Like our friendship really escalated very quickly. Our husbands are friends now. We take trips with our kids, and so it escalated pretty quickly from like a personal level, but then from a professional too. I think we just recognized that we would be good business partners. We have a lot in common as far as work ethic and drive and really wanting to make a splash and do some things in the agriculture industry. And so we just thought, why not start kind of maybe teaming up and doing some projects together. And that's kind of how, it was very organic for us to start the podcast. That was not our first business together. We actually have Elevate Ag, which is a producer forward company where we created an online course for anyone who is in ranching and farming who wanted to do what we did, which is, make money from online by, whether it's professional speaking or brand partnerships or, maybe direct to consumer beef business, like whatever that business is they wanted to build. We created that course to help them use social media as a marketing tool, which is what we were doing. And that was our first business together. And we love it. It is our first baby together. But I think we realized through creating that because that's actually where our podcast came from. We had created a podcast to pair with that to kind of, as another way, there are people who wanted to share online could. And so if you scroll back, you'll see where we went through a rebrand. Like our old episodes are actually more social media content driven. But we really quickly realized that what people love to hear us talk about is the industry. We love to have deep conversations about it. We have opinions and beliefs and we're not afraid to say them. And so we recognized people were craving that. And then we recognized we were craving it too. Again, while I am so passionate about helping producers utilize the online space to kind of further our industry as a whole or their operation individually, I'm really passionate about having, thoughtful, thought-provoking conversations about agriculture and really trying to connect with like our urban counterparts and people who want to feel reconnected to the food system but don't really understand how to. Or maybe, I look at the other news sources that are out there for ag and I don't even want to read them and I'm in agriculture. So for a consumer to go and try and understand, like for instance, we talked about the dairy fire. I don't know when your podcast will air, but one of our more recent episodes is about the really big dairy fire that's making news. It was 18,000 dairy cows were all killed in the fire. And if you're a consumer and you're wanting to try and understand why a barn is that big, why would the producer make that choice? How did this fire happen? Why can't they have sprinkler systems? All of those questions that I feel like you would naturally have. And you want to go to someone you relate to that talks about it in a way you can understand it. I just didn't feel like that was out there. And I really felt like Tara and I could do that for our industry. And that's, I think, what I'm so passionate about doing is just reconnecting people to the food system, making ag relatable, making it fun, making it sexy, making it cool again. Like I want people to want to learn about their food system again and want to understand it. And I just didn't know where they would go to get that feeling and connection right now, besides until we just started Discover.
I agree, like fully, because I don't think it did exist until you guys started Discover AG. Like I really don't know where you could go. I don't know where you would start as someone in the public who is not related to ag. If you wanted to learn anything, you would start this big search of news articles on news articles, probably understand maybe 10% of them, get confused, stop, right? Like you wouldn't really know where to go, what they're saying. I think your guys' platform is so wonderful for so many ways, but one of them is just how digestible it is and how you guys do such a good job of leading us down the pathway to be like, this is like, we understand your questions, say with the fires that you would have these for sprinklers and production related questions. We understand that you have those, and this is how we're going to lead you down to the answer and explain to you kind of our world. So I love that peek behind the curtain of an industry and also food systems that are so part of our lives, but we really have no idea unless you're within the community. You really have no idea how they function. So it's such a wonderful platform. I think one thing that really stuck out with your answer was the fact that you and Tara never met each other for years, that you were just online best friends and then didn't meet each other for years later. I did not expect that. That's crazy.
And even now it's funny because sometimes we're obviously such a big part of each other's lives. We talk, I would say, pretty much every single day. It's very odd if we go a day without talking, whether it's personally related or business related. And so it's funny. So sometimes she'll reference people, Natalie or whatever, Luke and Natalie or, the boys or their names or whatever. And they'll be like, who, because I do very know little in her, I know her immediate family, her husband and kids, and I've met her parents and his parents, but I haven't met like her friends or like their friend group very much. I'm like obviously not a part of their community or anything. And so when she so casually drops my name all the time, they're like, Natalie in Nebraska, like, what are you talking about? Like, who is this person?
It's like you're her like secret family in Nebraska. You know what I mean? Like it's that type
kind
of like this alter ego life. Like what are you talking about?
She's like, I promise she's real. We're like the new age pen pals.
I love that you guys met each other and created two businesses, Elevated AG originally, and then this pivot to Discover AG and kind of this platform that's been so lovely. Getting into kind of the podcast and into the content of it, one thing that resonated with me while I listened to a couple episodes was just how nuanced the conversation was and the depth of the conversation. And again, that this platform was created by farmers for farmers. It's truly a community-based platform, and it's good by leading the public step by step down a conversation and along with this nuanced discussion, but just the spectrum of discussion, the nuance of it. Could you kind of walk us through how you choose which topics to talk about? Because you guys talk about everything. You talk about like strikes in Italy, Heinz ketchup, labeling of beef in America. You talk about fires. You talk about literally everything, sustainability. How do you decide your topics? And are there any topics or trends which you are the most interested in?
Yeah, so it's funny you say it's built by farmers for farmers, because I do, at our core, who we would love to have tuning in is actually non-farmers. And so you're right. I think it highlights, though, how some of the conversation we talk about is maybe only understood or picked up on quickly by, within the industry. And so it's hard to kind of walk that line, which is, being educational and informative about the industry, but relaying it to people who are so removed from it, that they could understand it and be interested in it. And so we do pay really careful attention to what we talk about, because we are, again, trying to walk that line of, discussing things that are relevant to the ag industry. There's a lot of food articles out there, things that are talking about that I wouldn't necessarily want to put on our podcast and talk about. But at the same time, so to respect the industry that we're from, but also appeal to the people that are outside of it, has to be kind of an attention grabbing thing, or, something. It's an interesting line to walk, I would say. And so we are really picky and choosy when it comes, that's not a real word, but that's what we are. When it comes to the articles we pick, and basically all week long, we just spend time perusing the different platforms, whether it's Twitter's, I've become head deep dive. I know I'm 20 years late, but I'm just now becoming obsessed with the Twitter as a platform. And so we'll kind of peruse, major news articles like New York Times, Wall Street, what are they talking about when it comes to, food and environment and climate. And we look on the different platforms. Lots of times our community has now started sending stuff to us. So people will,
love that.
I love it too. I love it so much. And you asked how we know what to choose. One of that is sometimes it's that we'll get sent the same thing over and over again. We'll be like, okay, people clearly want us to talk about this and give our 2 cents on it. And so we just, pretty much scroll all week long looking for things we could talk about that we think is interesting. And then we brain dump it onto each other. And then we just sort out the 3 that we think are the best out of that. And yeah, it ends up being a conglomerate sometimes. And we try and balance so that one episode isn't all about the dairy industry or, fake meat or milk or whatever it is. We try and bring that, I guess, diversity even to every single episode, so that you're not tuning in and hearing 3 news sources or 3 news stories about kind of the same thing. We try and stay clear of that redundancy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the answer. That was very lovely. I apologize for the farmers by farmers. What I meant by that is just, I could just see from even being an outsider, I could learn so much about it. And there has been so many new things with policy that I went on a deep dive that I was like, what is this about labeling beef? This is crazy. Does Canada have this? Is this just in the US? I could understand new things that I didn't know about 5 seconds beforehand, right? From the public. But what resonated with me is just the sense of community. And if I was in agriculture, that this would be my place to go. And I could learn what's going on, all the resources, new connections. I would have a bunch of people to follow. It would just be really for me. So that's what I meant by it, that farmer by farmer.
Makes sense. So I am sorry that I misinterpreted that. So thank you. Yeah, it is. We do. And I would attribute that we've had quick success, quick growth when we rebranded to talking about what we are now. And I, like you said, I think it is because if you're in the industry, you relate to us and you crave that information. And because we do talk about so many varying things. I mean, I am not an expert on half of what we talk about. I have to research so much, because when you're in the industry, I think people think that when you grow the food, you know everything there is to know about growing food. And it's I know nothing about what it takes to grow avocados or almonds or grapes or oyster farming. We just talked about Texas and oyster farming. It's there's so much to learn. And so I think if you're in the industry, you relate to us because you're in it with us and you want to learn more about, your own industry. And then, yeah, if you're outside of it, hopefully you relate to us. I think you do. And then the same thing, you want to learn more about what you know absolutely nothing about, so it is, I would like to think, hopefully appealing to everyone, because like you said, that community of just wanting to find that space that informs you, but in a relatable way.
Like, I think it relates to everybody. I just think it's so cool. And like the amount of research that you guys do, and that like I'm completely convinced that you know everything about all food. And like I could talk to you about oyster farming and you could be an oyster farmer tomorrow. Like you guys just do your research. It's meticulous. It's so lovely to see that breadth of conversation too. It shows you how complicated agriculture is, because again, we're talking about one of the major industries of the entire world, and it's such a heterogeneous industry. It's also so different by production. There's just so much that goes to it. This brings us kind of to our next topic, is because you guys do so much research and you guys have really tuned into so many different things, what has been something that's been the most surprising or really interesting? What is one rabbit hole that you went down that you were like, 2 months of my life, I decided to look up oyster farming, and I don't know why, didn't expect to, but it was a crazy new segue.
Yeah, it's hard to pick. I do think I have fun with every single episode. And, you mentioned the research and the learning about it. And that is something I actually truly enjoy. And I think that's why there's the longevity for Tara and I in it, because neither of us dread that. It actually kind of fuels my cup, it refills it to sit down and kind of learn and do that research. And maybe it's like my pharmacy background coming out in me, a little bit of that science. And Tara is actually an environmental scientist by education.
Okay.
And so she kind of has that same, I guess, maybe a little bit of curiosity for the factual side of things. So it's hard to pick because I do love everything we talk about. A big rabbit hole I went down probably a couple weeks ago now, maybe a month ago, was we talked about China owning farmland and Bill Gates a little bit. And I learned so much about foreign ownership of land in the US that I was not really aware of. It was very interesting to read about and talk about because I just never really thought about it. And everyone likes to hone in on China and Bill Gates. And there's a lot of other things to bring to the conversation when it comes to foreign land ownership. We recently talked about, you kind of mentioned it earlier, about Italy banning lab-based meat. And that's kind of been a recent favorite one for me that we talked about. It really, not so much from an information standpoint, but from, I almost like a perspective viewpoint, I guess, changed things a little bit for me. I kind of went down like a food sovereignty rabbit hole. And it just made me kind of have a different little bit of a lens maybe about the way I think about the food system, or from like maybe a global aspect actually. And so I enjoyed that episode. And then, yeah, like I said, what I know well is cattle ranching. I know beef well. And so every other topic and episode is fun and exciting for me because I do just learn something crazy different that I never learned before. I learned so much about California agriculture when we, covered the flood, and I learned so much about marine and aquaculture when we talked about Texas, oysters. And so, if we talk about chicken or pork or whatever it is, it's like I learned something new. And so I don't know, they're all fun. They're all near and dear to me.
I think I would have the same answer, that I'd be like, I have no favorite. I love all of the rabbit holes that I went down. And I do think one thing that's really interesting is that Italy episode and the banning of lab meat, and with your sovereignty, and please jump in with more. But I think what was really cool was how cultural it was based. The argument was based on food culture of Italy and who we are as a people, defined by our food and defined by our agriculture. So they also, I think, we're moving towards banned alternative dairy. Was that also a thing as well? They were protecting both dairy and meat because they were like, this is crucial to us being Italian. And I thought that was just something very different that I didn't expect.
Same. And it's funny that I didn't expect it because I always say that food is very personal. It's tied to core memories. It is part of, family around the table. It is part of your heritage. I always talk about that. And yet for somehow I missed the big puzzle piece that it truly is a representation of culture. And like I said, I just think it opened up my eyes really, truly to, I think, maybe the need of preserving that more than we have. I don't know if that's really a forefront of maybe anyone's mind but Italy's.
Mm-hmm.
and that's a bold statement. I'm sure there's a lot of places that are trying to, but I think when we are such a global market,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of protecting food heritage is not tip of mind or top of tongue for anyone. And I think that really made me shift a little bit of how, if I had control or had a, larger platform and voice to say things, that maybe that is something I would advocate for, like that prime minister. I really related to her making the choice to sign that petition because of food heritage and wanting to honor that. And I thought, if I was in her footsteps, I think I would do the same thing.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we always talk about food in our family because we're Polish. Like, I was raised by two hippies, but they were like, we'll never be vegetarian because we're Polish. Like, we can't, like, you know what I mean? Like, it is so tied to culture and so tied to families. So you're right. It shouldn't be surprising, but it was definitely something that stuck with me after listening to that one episode, that it was very different.
Where we live in Nebraska is actually a huge Polish Czech community. And so, yes, chicken and dumplings and kolaches and all of your Polish food, I have become fully aware of the importance of it to you guys now that I have married my husband and living here in this community. So.
Oh my goodness. It's like literally our culture. When I was a kid growing up, my grandma would just make me like vats of mashed potatoes for my birthday. Like that was what was my gift, was just food. Like, it was
Happy
just
birthday.
Yeah.
I would take that even now though. I'd be like, thank you.
Honestly, it was the best. I was like, no one has ever been able to like stand to her level of mashed potatoes for a birthday, but it was just because of Polish heritage. This is probably something that we've already kind of touched on a little bit. And also about the founding of the podcast and the reason why you guys started this whole platform. But are there any misconceptions of the agricultural industry by the public, or misunderstandings by the public? And if so, where do you believe that the public would need the most education? Like, where should we start to re-educate ourselves to agriculture and production?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me on my personal page, Natalie Kovarik, I devote time and energy to cattle and the climate. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there about the negative effects of it, how we should avoid it. I don't think there's enough discussion around what would happen if we did, what would happen if we went, all plant-based or vegan or vegetarian, the implications of the good things cattle do. And so I think that's what first comes to mind for me. And I don't know if sometimes I don't know if it is as loud as I think it is. Like, am I just getting fed kind of this narrative? It's like you can kind of create your own rabbit hole, right? Especially on social media, when your, For You pages and the content you get served to you is what you want to see, right? It's designed to be that way. But then I'll go to a museum in Chicago or something and see, a narrative about how, cattle are killing the climate. We should eat less meat to save our planet. Or, I'll see someone will send me something from their teacher that was done. And, we covered actually on the podcast, we covered a Utah teacher that was teaching that in the school system. And so it's like every time I kind of think that, maybe it's not as loud or as big of a narrative as I think it is, stuff like that happens. And so I still devote time and energy to bringing awareness around the conversation that, the data shows, if you get into the science and the numbers, the ag industry accounts for less than 4% of, greenhouse gas emissions. And if we went plant-based diet, it would only decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by 2.6%. And so I dig into those numbers and I talk about what would happen to, cattle upcycle. Ruminants are the only animal that can take grass and literally turn it into a protein, which protein is very, very important. I'm not a dietitian, so I don't spend a ton of my social platform on dietary things because I don't feel like that's my area of expertise, but we need protein. Like, protein is very, very important. And if you have an animal that can take, grass, cellulose, which covers a lot of our planet that can't be done for anything else when it comes to our food system, and can turn it into protein for us, which is one of the most meat is one of the most nutrient dense proteins you can get. It blows my mind. And then on top of being upcyclers, cattle consume byproducts. So over 86% of what they consume is actually inedible to humans. A large part of it is either grass or byproducts. Like, they'll consume almond hulls, orange peels. In our area, we do distillers grains because we're in the corn, we're in the Midwest. And so they're taking all those byproducts. And there's studies to show that if they weren't consuming the byproducts, at best, they would be composted, which would never happen in our society. But that would increase our greenhouse gas emissions by 5 times for those industries. And if they were just taken to a landfill, which is what would happen, if cattle weren't eating them, it would increase those industries' greenhouse gas footprint by 49 times. And so there's these implications of removing cattle. You talk about they're used in medicine, they're used in gelatin, they're used in crayon. I mean, they're used, byproducts of animals are used in so many things. And so I think I just spend so much time trying to draw conversation around the benefits of them upcycling and grazing and, aerating our soils and fertilizing our soils and all the really good things cattle can do for soils, as well as, bigger picture of what would happen on the negative side if we remove them too.
I think that's such a fantastic answer and also such a fantastic thing to support, but it's also a wonderful thing coming from you, coming from an expert in cattle ranching, because I do think that we need to have a more nuanced conversation of cattle ranching. I think it is unfortunately a loud tunnel. It's probably louder on your page with your algorithm, but it is a loud conversation. And I think sometimes what's lost in that conversation is, like you said, what are the good things that cows do? What are their impact in terms of like nitrogen cycling or soil consistency or helping with the sandlands and that type of ecosystem? How do they interact with that ecosystem? And then on an economy side, like you said, with like all of the substrate that they're eating, right? All of the byproducts that they're eating, for you guys, it's corn husk. How are they impacting us there? And what are they saving us from? So I think that it's just a very nuanced conversation. And I think that's a fantastic one to dive into. And I think the public, their hearts are in the right place, but maybe that resource doesn't exist yet, or maybe that science isn't as widely available.
I'm smiling because I feel like you get it. And it's fun to have those conversations with people who get it. And like you said, I fault no one. I absolutely do not fault anyone for not understanding these implications or thinking beyond the headline of, or the small picture of, if we got rid of cows, there'd be less methane. It's like, there's so much more beyond that. And I don't fault anyone for just seeing that and stopping there. Yeah. But what I'm passionate about is putting the comma there and then just having the rest of the conversation. And I see where we got to where we are, where people, not just with the food industry, but every industry. I mean, I don't think much about what it takes for me to switch up my light bulb and have lights in my house. Our modernized, the convenience where we've gotten in society has segmented us from so many industries, not just our food industry. And so it is absolutely no one's fault. It's just happens to be where we are as a society now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for saying that. I get it, but it's just something that has always resonated with me as well when it comes to sustainability and climate change, because people are they're on board and they want to do the right thing, but maybe they just don't know. Right. And you're right. Yeah. There has been a disconnect in all industries and a disconnect in knowledge. So I think you having your platform, you and Tara, creating Discover AG and having these nuanced conversations is just so refreshing and does such a good. So it's so wonderful to see.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we have a couple minutes left, and I'm about to hit you with another lofty question. So please try your best. Maybe just choose one thing if it comes to you. But for agriculture, where do you kind of see the future of agriculture? And again, it's super lofty. So maybe what's one thing for your hopes and the future improvements of the industry?
Yeah, this is actually a favorite question of mine because it's something I've been thinking a lot about with our podcast, but I do not have an answer for it. So as much as I love that you asked it, because I think it's really important. And like I said, I've been devoting a lot of my own brain energy to thinking what the future of agriculture looks like. I just don't know. I feel like we're kind of at a point of juxtaposition where we have a lot of people, a big movement, I would say, to scale back, almost demechanize a little bit and return to just a lesser, I don't know. I mean, what I want to say is what would happen if we did it, which is a less productive, less efficient food system is where I feel like people want to get back to, but without realizing that's what would happen if we kind of reverted back to smaller, more local. And I get the push for that. And so I see that on one hand that maybe, and I see the problems with getting to where we got to. And so maybe on one hand, it would serve us to, go back to a little bit more local and small and that train of thought. But I don't know if it's possible with, again, going back to our global food system. Like there's importation and exportation, and to think about changing that even just feels like I don't even know where you would start to go back to reverting in a different direction than where we have progressed over the last, decades. And on the same breath, I feel like we just interviewed someone that was talking about, self-automated tractors. And so I feel like there's so much of technology that is coming into agriculture and our food system well beyond where we even are now, which I think, again, people think that we're like factorized and it's, no, it's not humans growing your food, it's machines and stuff. And we're so far beyond, from that of where technology, the tech boom could take us in agriculture. And so I don't know what the future looks like. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. I think, like, again, it's such a lofty question, and it's such a big question of who knows what the future is going to be, because it could be all of a sudden a new change in technology or new change in market. Something could happen, something change in policy could instantly affect it. So on one hand, you don't really know what's going to happen. Two, it's a huge global scaled industry in agriculture. I could see it just this unknown of where are we going to go, what's going to happen. And I think you are right that there is a movement of moving back to something smaller, and how that would affect productivity without the general public kind of knowing. I think that is true, and definitely a movement there. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip to the very last one. And this is the question, Natalie, that I was actually the most excited about, and I can't wait to hear your answer, is what are the next steps for Discover AG? What do you and Tara have cooking up?
Yeah, we are funneling. So our podcast is not even a year old yet from conception, and then looking at our point of rebranding to what we talk about now, we're only a couple months into that. And so we're still funneling a lot of time and energy into our podcasting space. So anyone who's tuning in now, I'm assuming you're a podcast person, if you found, today's conversation fun, entertaining, and informative, we'd love if you'd hop over and follow us and listen to us on Discover Ag, because that is where we're funding a lot of our 2023 energy. And then we're also in the works on like a behind the scenes docuseries that would pair with the podcast, where, we could go out to these farms and ranches and have these conversations with actual producers and stuff. So that is hopefully on the, forefront of where we'll be headed in 2023 and 2024.
Oh my goodness. I absolutely love that. And I am so excited. A docuseries sounds fantastic. I can't wait to listen to all of your podcasts. I'm going to link everything into our channels, and I'm just so excited to see what you guys have cooking up. So thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you very much for coming up today on the Smoko podcast. It's been absolutely lovely having you and learning so much about agriculture and ranching.
Thank you. It was so fun. And I wish you the best of luck with all your upcoming guests and all the upcoming really important topics that I know you're going to dive into.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. Okay. Bye, guys. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm going to link Natalie into our channel and Discover AG as well. And thank you again for watching.